rain had started without warning, a sudden downpour that turned the cracked asphalt of the abandoned warehouse district into a slick, glistening mirror. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the twisted metal and shattered windows in stark, unforgiving flashes. Somewhere in the darkness, a low, desperate whine cut through the roar of the storm. Detective Harris's boots splashed through puddles as he moved toward the sound, heart hammering, mind racing. He knew what everyone else had already whispered behind closed doors. The police dog had failed the mission. But standing there in the storm, Harris could see it. Through the mud, the blood, the exhaustion, the dog's eyes still searching, still loyal, still burning with a silent plea. And in that moment, a knot of anger and disbelief twisted in Harris's gut. How could a hero, a life saved countless times, be condemned for a single misunderstood failure? He dropped to his knees beside the trembling German shepherd, running a hand over soaked fur, and swore to the lightning-lit night that no one would decide this dog's fate. Not if he had any breath left in his body. The world had written him off. But tonight, under the storm and the rain, they were both still fighting. The rain had not stopped since nightfall, turning the empty streets into rivers of reflective silver and black. Neon signs flickered weakly in the puddles, distorted like fractured memories of better nights, while the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt, oil, and something more metallic, fear. Detective Harris pulled his coat tighter against the storm, but it did little to keep the chill from creeping under his skin. He had seen a lot in his years on the force, but tonight, the weight of failure pressed heavier than any past tragedy. Every footstep splashed through the puddles, a harsh punctuation to the silence of the district, and every flash of lightning etched the warehouse walls in stark, unforgiving relief. Inside that warehouse, somewhere in the shadows, a sound rose and fell with the rhythm of the storm, a low, hesitant whine that cut through the thunder, small and fragile, yet filled with a plaintive hope that refused to die. Harris's boots came to a stop. The whine had grown more insistent, carrying the unmistakable timbre of his partner, the German shepherd. Everyone had written him off. Command had said the dog had failed the mission, had hesitated, had misjudged the situation, and now the order was as cold and absolute as steel. Put him down. Harris's stomach twisted as he knelt in the pouring rain, water dripping into his collar, into his ears, mingling with the sound of his own heartbeat. He had walked past that kennel earlier, past the judgmental stares of colleagues who avoided eye contact, and past the whispered conversations that mocked loyalty as weakness. But the whine reached him now, sharp and trembling, and all that bureaucratic cruelty fell away beneath the storm's roar. The dog emerged from the shadows, formatted with rain, legs trembling, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and trust. Harris's hand moved instinctively, brushing along the damp, coarse fur, feeling the shivers under his fingers. The animal had never looked smaller. Yet in that moment, he carried all the weight of every life he had saved. Every criminal caught, every time he had run toward danger while men ran away. "We're still here," Harris whispered, voice hoarse, cracking under the tension that had built over hours, days, weeks. The lightning illuminated the dog's face, revealing the glossy intelligence in eyes that refused to surrender. He had failed, if the world wanted to call it that, but to Harris, he was still perfect in the only way that mattered. Unwavering, loyal, unbroken. Every step Harris took toward the warehouse's rusted door felt like wading through memory. The mission that had gone wrong replayed in his mind like a fractured film. The sirens that had wailed too late, the calls that had never been heard, the moment the dog hesitated. Command had never asked what he saw, what the dog smelled, what minute details might have changed the outcome. They only wanted blame. And yet here the dog was, shaking in the rain, refusing to turn away from him, refusing to accept that this was the end. Harris knelt lower, pressing his forehead to the wet muzzle, tasting the iron tang of fear mixed with the sharp scent of rain-soaked fur. It was a sacred, desperate connection, the kind that needed no words to convey the enormity of what had been lost and what might still be saved. The wind tore through the warehouse district with a fury that made the windows rattle in their frames. Trash skittered across the flooded streets, banging against walls and metal doors. Yet the dog stood firm, anchored by instinct and trust. Harris could hear every heartbeat, his own mingling with the panting breaths of the animal, both trembling from adrenaline, both silently acknowledging the storm outside, mirrored the storm within. His mind raced. He knew the paperwork had already been signed, the protocols followed, the fate of the dog sealed on paper. But paper didn't know loyalty, didn't know courage, didn't know the look in eyes that refused to give up. Harris rose to his feet, pulling the dog close, rain plastering his hair to his scalp. He could feel the shaking in the dog's limbs, tiny tremors of panic and exhaustion, and he swore under his breath that no bureaucrat, no judge, no nameless face of authority would decide this dog's worth while he was breathing. In the reflection of the puddles, Harris saw more than just himself and the dog. He saw every mission, every chase, every alley where fear had turned to courage. He saw nights when the dog had run through flames, through collapsing buildings, through gunfire and returned, tail wagging, eyes bright, ready for the next call. How could anyone call that a failure? And yet the world had, and now their gaze, those invisible eyes of judgment pressed upon him through every raindrop, every shiver, every gust of wind. Harris felt anger ignite in his chest, not the controlled anger of an officer, but the raw human kind that threatened to spill over in a storm of its own. The dog's whine shifted, softer now, almost pleading, a sound that said, "I trust you. You can save me." And Harris, standing soaked and shivering, felt the full weight of responsibility settle over his shoulders. This was no longer about the mission. This was about redemption, about justice, about proving that courage and loyalty could not be measured by a single mistake. The storm above mirrored the storm of his own mind, chaotic and unrelenting, yet strangely cleansing. Every flash of lightning seemed to illuminate a path forward, and in that ephemeral glow, Harris could see the possibility of hope, fragile and shining like a shard of glass. He led the dog into the warehouse, every step deliberate, as if the world outside had stopped and only the two of them existed in the rain-blasted night. Inside, shadows clung to broken machinery and rusted beams, but the dog's eyes adjusted, searching, alert, aware. Harris's heart thudded in sync with the dog's, each beat a drum of defiance, of refusal to accept a fate that had been dictated without understanding. The storm outside battered the walls, but inside a quieter storm brewed, a storm of loyalty, of trust, of determination to rewrite what the world had already declared finished. And as the thunder rolled overhead, Harris whispered, more to himself than to the dog, "We're not finished yet. Not now. Not ever." The German shepherd pressed closer, damp fur mingling with Harris's sleeve. A silent affirmation, a promise in 4 paws and a steadfast heart. Outside, the world raged, the rain fell, and the lightning flashed. But in that warehouse, amid shadows and decay, a new story began. A story of second chances, of courage misunderstood, of loyalty that refused to die. The night was long, the storm relentless, but for the first time since the mission, Harris allowed himself to believe that the fight was far from over. The morning arrived slowly, wrapped in a gray fog that clung to every surface, turning the city into a watercolor of muted shapes and dripping metal. Detective Harris had barely slept, the storm from the night before still thrumming in his ears like distant gunfire, and the German shepherd pressed close beside him, head resting against Harris's thigh, eyes alert but heavy with fatigue. The kennel doors that had once promised safety now felt like a cage counting down to doom. Command's orders had not changed. The papers were stamped, signed, and delivered. Today they would take the dog away. The word to put down hung in the air, as sharp and cold as ice. And yet every time Harris looked into those golden brown eyes, he saw trust, unwavering and unbroken. And he felt a quiet, searing fury rise in his chest. How could the world be so blind to bravery, so cruel to loyalty? The city smelled of damp concrete and exhaust, the fog thickening the air, until each breath felt like inhaling a gray soup of sadness. Harris led the dog out for what he knew could be their last walk together, each footstep muted against the soaked pavement. The dog moved slowly, tail low, ears flicking at every sound, the distant wail of sirens, the scrape of trash cans in the wind, the soft hiss of tires on wet asphalt. It was as though he sensed the impending separation, a subtle dread woven into every movement. Harris clenched his jaw, his knuckles white against the leash, and forced his mind to focus on the here and now. There were still hours before the department would arrive, still hours to fight, to bend the impossible into something survivable. They passed the corner store where Harris had bought the dog treats after training exercises, the small paper bag of biscuits long gone. But the memory vivid, the way the dog's tail had wagged so hard it had knocked the bag off the counter. Harris felt a pang of nostalgia, bitter and sharp, and he knelt, resting a hand on the dog's soaked head. Not yet," he whispered, voice low, almost trembling. Not today. You're not leaving me today." The dog pressed against him, leaning on Harris's leg as if the human's resolve could somehow shield him from the cold bureaucracy of the world. Around them, fog rolled through alleyways, curling around dumpsters and fire escapes, muffling the city's usual roar and giving the moment a fragile, suspended quality. Back at the precinct, Harris moved like a man haunted, weaving through hallways where the chatter of officers felt alien, their laughter hollow, tinged with the judgment of those who had already decided the dog's fate. The German shepherd followed silently, paws clicking against the tiled floor, a quiet rhythm that seemed to echo the tension in Harris's chest. He could feel the eyes of colleagues on him, their glances sharp and speculative, yet none dared speak. The whispers of the failed mission had grown into a chorus of condemnation, and every officer he passed seemed to weigh whether to add another note. The dog, sensing every tremor of emotion, lowered his head, nostrils flaring, ears twitching at the unspoken hostility that hung like fog in the air. Harris moved to the office of Lieutenant Brenner, the man responsible for final approvals, and laid out the dog's history, every heroic act, every time the animal had run into danger and returned unscathed. He spoke quietly but with an edge of controlled anger, letting the facts speak where words had failed before. Yet Brenner's eyes remained cold, unwavering. Rules are rules, Harris," he said, voice flat. "Do one failure, no matter how small, and the protocol is clear. We can't make exceptions." Harris's jaw tightened. He could see the outline of the dog in the reflection of the window, tail tucked, fur wet, eyes following every movement, understanding more than any human in the room. That look, so full of quiet faith, made Harris's chest ache with a protective rage that refused to be dismissed. The hours crawled forward, each one heavier than the last. Harris spent them trying every avenue. Phone calls, emails, whispered appeals to sympathetic officers. But the bureaucracy was a wall, unyielding, indifferent to loyalty or courage. The dog sat beside him, head resting on Harris's knee, sometimes whining softly, sometimes licking his hand, a subtle insistence that they were in this together. Harris's mind drifted to memories of the field, of nights chasing suspects through alleys slick with rain, the way the dog had vaulted over fences, ears back, teeth bared, instinct and training fused into pure heroism. That same heroism was now a crime in the eyes of the department. By afternoon, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, droplets clinging to broken signs and rusted fire escapes. Harris took the dog to the abandoned park near the river, a place where the world felt temporarily suspended, removed from paperwork, orders, and judgment. The dog sniffed the wet grass, ears flicking at every sound, the distant call of a crow, the splash of water against the bank, the faint rumble of the city in the distance. Harris watched, taking in every tremble of muscle, every hesitant sniff, every subtle flick of the tail. Each movement was a silent plea, each glance a question. "Will you save me?" Harris knelt again, pressing his forehead against the dog's damp fur. "I'll find a way," he whispered, though he could barely summon belief in his own words. "I promise." Evening arrived with a pale, bruised sky, and the fog lifted just enough to reveal the city lights glimmering like distant stars on the horizon. Harris and the dog returned to the precinct, each step heavier, more deliberate, aware that the hours were slipping through their fingers like sand. Inside, the halls felt colder now, shadows stretching longer across the walls, echoes of distant conversations bouncing off the tiles. The dog refused to eat, ignoring the usual offering, standing by Harris as though tethered by something invisible yet unbreakable. Harris understood. This was more than hunger. It was fear. Fear of oblivion, of being judged and condemned for something that could not define the totality of a life devoted to service. Night fell fully, and the storm from yesterday had become a memory in puddles and dripping eaves. Harris sat on a worn bench in the kennel area, dog pressed close, and let the silence stretch between them. There was anger, yes, and exhaustion, but beneath it all, a fragile thread of hope remained. He would not give up. The city might have turned its back, the paperwork might be cold and final, but loyalty, true, unwavering, golden brown loyalty, deserved more than indifference. Harris's fingers traced the dog's damp fur, feeling the pulse of life, the heartbeat of courage, and he made a silent vow that no matter the cost, no matter the obstacles, he would fight. Today the dog's freedom still existed, fragile as a candle flame in the wind, and Harris would guard it with everything he had. As they sat there, the distant hum of traffic and the soft drip of water from the roof became a rhythm, a quiet promise that they were not yet finished. The dog's eyes met his, full of unspoken questions and unwavering trust, and Harris felt the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in his chest. Today might be the last day of freedom, but it would not be the end. Not yet. Not yet. Not in that fog-bound precinct amid shadows and uncertainty. The bond between man and animal held fast, a defiance of rules, orders, and misunderstanding. And as Harris stood, leash in hand, he whispered into the gray evening, "We're going to get through this. Together." The dog's tail lifted slightly, a subtle, tentative wag, and Harris knew the fight was far from over. The city had a different sound that morning, quieter but sharper in its clarity. The scrape of a lone garbage can in the wind, the distant hum of a delivery truck, the soft patter of drizzle on pavement. Detective Harris moved through it with deliberate caution, the German shepherd at his side, ears twitching at every subtle vibration. The dog had stopped shaking, though his fur was still damp, and his eyes glimmered with that familiar intelligence, scanning, calculating, trusting Harris to guide the way. For hours, they had sat in silence, the weight of yesterday's storm still pressing against their lungs. But today felt different. There was a quiet insistence in the air, a rhythm of purpose that Harris had not felt since the mission's failure. Somewhere, hidden beneath paperwork and bureaucracy, lay the truth waiting to be uncovered. And Harris was determined to find it before the world could finish condemning the dog. Inside the precinct, the hum of fluorescent lights flickered over stacks of case files, yellowing reports and digital screens blinking reminders of forgotten deadlines. Harris moved to the archives, a space dusty and forgotten, where files older than some officers' careers rested in cardboard boxes and metal shelves. He ran his fingers along the spines, the edges of paper rough against his callous skin, eyes scanning for the one document that could shift fate. Somewhere in the jumble of reports, he remembered a detail that had been dismissed, a small, almost invisible error in the mission log, overlooked by every officer who had not been there. The dog's hesitation, misinterpreted, had been framed as failure, but Harris knew better. He had seen it, the sniff, the careful assessment, the split-second choice that likely saved lives, even if it had cost immediate success. Hours bled into one another. Harris pored over surveillance footage, every pixel flickering with static, but gradually revealing the dog's movements in clarity. There he was, leaping through shadows, ears back, teeth bared, scanning corners, alert for threats invisible to the human eye. The dog had not failed. He had assessed, adapted, and protected. Harris leaned closer to the screen, hand pressed to his mouth as a rush of relief mingled with fury. Every step the dog took had been precise, every decision measured by instinct honed through years of service. Yet the reports had told another story, and the world had believed it. Harris's throat tightened as he watched the replay of the moment deemed a failure. The dog had hesitated, yes, but in that hesitation had ensured the safety of an officer who would otherwise have been exposed. The truth had been buried beneath assumptions, fear, and a bureaucratic need for clear lines of blame. The dog nudged Harris's hand, soft but insistent, reminding him of the present as he became consumed by revelation. Harris looked down and met the golden brown eyes, shining with quiet faith, as if asking, "Will you believe in me? Will you fight for me too?" And Harris did. He picked up the leash, feeling the firm muscles beneath wet fur. The heart beat steady against his own. And he made a vow in that silent, crowded office that no one would dismiss this hero again. Not on his watch, not ever. The investigation became urgent, deliberate. He called in favors, whispered questions to sympathetic colleagues, and navigated corridors of skepticism and doubt, each footstep a defiance of the invisible wall built around the dog's fate. By mid-afternoon, Harris had pieced together the evidence needed. Video footage, a corrected mission report, testimonies from officers who had been too afraid to speak earlier. Each piece was a lifeline, a small shard of proof that together formed a narrative impossible to ignore. The dog, sensing the shift in energy, wagged his tail lightly for the first time in days, head cocked, ears forward, as if aware that the storm was finally breaking. Harris's chest ached with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. He had known all along what the dog represented. Not failure, but courage misunderstood, loyalty misread, a life judged unfairly. evening settled over the precinct like a soft gray blanket. Outside, the drizzle had slowed to scattered drops that shimmered on the pavement, and the low hum of the city provided a muted soundtrack to their triumph and progress. Harris returned to the kennel, papers clutched tightly, evidence assembled, strategy forming. The dog moved beside him, tail brushing against his leg, muzzle damp but eyes bright with anticipation. Harris knelt, resting a hand on the wet fur, feeling the tremor that remained only faintly now. "We're almost there," he whispered. "Just a little longer. You're not finished. They'll see." "They have to see." The dog leaned closer, a subtle affirmation, a trust that could not be broken by protocol, paperwork, or fear. The night deepened, and Harris sat in the dim light of the precinct, documents spread across a metal table, reviewing every detail, preparing the presentation that would challenge the judgment of the department. He could hear the faint scrape of shoes in the hallways, the soft murmur of conversations. Officers unaware that history was being rewritten in that small, cluttered office. The dog lay at his feet, head resting on paws, occasionally lifting his gaze as if to ask, "Are you ready?" Harris felt the pulse of urgency thrumming in the silence, each beat a reminder that time was precious, that every moment counted, that the dog's life hung in balance. When the first officer arrived to inspect the evidence, Harris felt his stomach tighten. The officer's eyes scanned the papers, lingered on the video footage, and then returned to Harris with a slow, deliberate nod. There was no celebration, no exclamation, only a subtle acknowledgement that the truth could no longer be denied. The dog, sensing the validation, lifted his head and let out a soft, relieved whine, tail sweeping the floor in a gentle arc. Harris exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening slightly, yet knowing the hardest battles were still ahead. Evidence alone could not erase fear or prejudice. It could, however, start the ripple that might save a life wrongly condemned. By midnight, Harris and the dog walked the empty streets once more, the glow of streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt, their silhouettes stretched long and thin. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and the metallic tang of the city, and Harris felt the first flicker of optimism in days. The dog moved with more ease now, head high, tail swaying, muscles no longer trembling with constant anxiety. For the first time since the failed mission, he seemed aware that the world might still offer mercy, that courage and loyalty could shine even when misinterpreted. Harris ran a hand along the wet fur, feeling the warmth of life beneath his fingers, and whispered into the quiet night, "We'll be okay. Trim up. I'll make sure of it. They'll see you for who you are." As they paused on a bridge overlooking the river, the water reflecting the silver glow of moonlight, Harris and the dog stood side by side in silence. The city slept unaware of the quiet heroism being recognized, the dog's bravery vindicated, even if only in a small, incremental way. And in that pause, amid the stillness of night and the lingering drizzle, Harris felt the bond between them solidify, unshakable and eternal. It was no longer just about fighting for life. It was about honoring loyalty, correcting injustice, and proving that even when the world misunderstood, courage would find its voice. The night had thickened into a velvet black, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional flicker of neon signs reflected in puddles. Detective Harris and the German Shepherd moved through the shadows with a tense, deliberate rhythm, ears alert, senses stretched taut like bowstrings. They had been called to a report of a missing child, a tip that was shaky at best, yet instinct screamed urgency. Every step through the abandoned district was measured, the wet asphalt slick beneath boots, the smell of rain-soaked concrete sharp in the nose. The dog led nose low, muscles coiled, tail swaying with the precision of a seasoned tracker. Harris's heart hammered in time with the animal's panting breaths, each shared heartbeat a drum of unspoken understanding. Tonight, the dog would have a chance to prove, beyond doubt, that the mission's previous failure had been a lie. The alleyways were narrow and twisting, walls covered in peeling posters and graffiti, the echoes of their footsteps bouncing back with an eerie rhythm. The drizzle had returned, slicking the bricks, seeping into shoes and pants, a relentless reminder of the city's indifference. Harris's eyes scanned the shadows, every movement a potential threat, every sound amplified by anticipation, and then the faintest cry, so soft it could have been carried by the wind, cut through the dark. The dog froze, ears pricked, chest rising and falling with controlled tension. In that instant, Harris knew the animal had smelled the child before he had seen or heard a thing. They were no longer a detective and a dog. They were one entity, fused by instinct, trust, and necessity. The pursuit began in silence, the dog darting ahead, paws hitting puddles with muted splashes, ears flat against the skull, eyes locked on an invisible trail. Harris ran behind, muscles straining, breath coming in controlled bursts, hand gripping the leash but allowing freedom where instinct demanded. Around them, the city seemed alive and malevolent. The hiss of leaking pipes, the distant siren wail, the scrape of metal against wet concrete, all became part of the rhythm, part of the chase. The child's voice grew faint, desperate, layered beneath the roar of distant traffic and the patter of rain. Each sound sharpened, each scent heightened, until the dog's precision was almost supernatural, a perfect choreography of survival and purpose. They rounded a corner, and the trail ended in a courtyard, shadows pooling like ink beneath broken lights. Harris's heart thumped violently. The silence was oppressive. The dog's low growl vibrated through the chest, ears back, teeth bared, not in aggression, but warning, alert, calculated. From the darkness, movement stirred, a figure huddled small and trembling. The child's eyes widened at the sight of the dog, and Harris felt the knot in his chest release slightly, hope igniting. Yet danger lingered. A sense of threat hung thick in the damp air. An instinct told Harris that the moment was far from over. He crouched low, moving slowly, voice steady but calm. The dog, muscles taut, kept his focus between Harris and the figure, ready to act, ready to protect. Suddenly, a shadow lunged from the side, a man, desperate and panicked, unaware of the dog's presence. In one fluid motion, the German shepherd intercepted, body colliding with the intruder, teeth showing but restrained, force enough to halt the threat without unnecessary harm. Harris's pulse raced as he moved forward, but it was clear. The dog had anticipated every angle, every risk, every possibility. The child's cry transformed into sobs of relief, and Harris felt the adrenaline surge through his veins like electricity. In the chaos, the dog's fur glistened with rain and sweat, muscles rippling, eyes sharp, ears flicking at every nuance, every signal. Every hesitation of the past mission had vanished, replaced by undeniable, unerring action. They led the child to safety, the wet streets reflecting the orange glow of distant streetlights. Harris's hands were cold and trembling, but he felt a steady warmth as the dog brushed against him, tail wagging softly, muzzle damp with exertion. The child clung to Harris, sobbing, yet occasionally glancing back at the dog, eyes wide with awe and understanding. Harris felt something raw, something elemental, pride not just in the rescue, but in the quiet hero beside him. No video, no report, no witness could fully capture what he had seen, the intelligence, the courage, the loyalty that transcended simple obedience. In that moment, the dog was more than a partner. He was the embodiment of every act of bravery Harris had ever known, every risk taken for the sake of another. The aftermath was a blur of police radios, flashing lights, and whispered acknowledgments from officers who had once doubted. Harris barely noticed them. His focus remained on the dog, now panting heavily, fur plastered with rain and grime, eyes shining with pride and relief. The officers' congratulations, the official reports, the quiet nods of respect, they mattered, yes, but nothing compared to the silent communion between man and animal that had carried them through the night. The dog had reclaimed his honor, not with words, but with action, with instinct, with the kind of courage that refused to be measured by paperwork or misinterpretation. Hours later, the city quieted, the rain finally easing to a soft drizzle that pattered against the windows like whispered applause. Harris and the dog sat on a curb, watching the orange glow of streetlights ripple across puddles, the child safely reunited with family in the distance. Harris ran his fingers along the dog's damp fur, feeling the tremor of exertion and relief, the steady heartbeat beneath his palm. "You did it," he whispered, voice breaking. "You've always done it. And now they'll have to see." The dog nuzzled his hand in response, tail wagging softly, eyes gleaming with that unspoken promise that had carried them through every danger, every fear, every death. In that quiet, silver-lit moment, Harris understood fully that heroism was not measured by success or failure, by praise or condemnation, but by the unwavering commitment to act when it mattered most. The dog's previous failure was a shadow compared to the brilliance of this night, a testament to instinct, courage, and loyalty that no bureaucrat could erase. They had run through darkness and rain together, each step a declaration that trust could not be broken, that love and loyalty could transcend misunderstanding. As dawn approached, bleeding pale light into the sky, Harris and the dog walked back through the streets, side by side, wet fur and soaked boots reflecting the first hints of morning. The city had been cruel, the judgment harsh, the odds stacked against them. But in the chase that defined them, both had proven their worth. And in the quiet exchange of glances, soft nudges, and shared breaths, Harris knew that no order, no paper, no human authority could ever undo the bond forged in shadow, rain, and courage. Tonight they had claimed victory, not for recognition, not for medals, but for life itself, for loyalty, and for the quiet, relentless heartbeat of a hero who refused to fail. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, spilling gold and amber across the city's wet streets, painting puddles in molten light. Detective Harris walked beside the German shepherd, now dry but still carrying the faint scent of rain, earth, and victory. The city felt different this morning, not in its structure, not in its traffic, not even in the hum of distant sirens, but in the subtle way light touched corners once hidden in shadow. Harris could see the difference reflected in the dog's eyes. Calm, aware, a quiet pride that needed no words. The long night of storm, danger, and misunderstanding had ended, and the air itself seemed to hum with relief. Every breath they drew was a testament to survival, to loyalty, to courage finally acknowledged. The precinct had changed as well. Officers who had once whispered criticisms now offered nods of respect, quiet acknowledgments of the dog's unwavering service. Harris had filed the corrected reports, presented the evidence, and watched as skeptical eyes softened. The dog, however, seemed only to notice Harris. His gaze followed every movement, ears flicking at each command, tail sweeping the floor in a rhythm of silent communication. Harris knelt beside him, brushing a hand through fur still thick and strong, feeling the pulse of life beneath his fingers. "You're safe," he murmured, voice low, carrying both relief and reverence. "They see you now. They finally see." The dog rested his head against Harris's shoulder, warm and trusting, a quiet affirmation that the fight, the one, had deepened the bond between them in ways words could never capture. Outside, the city was slowly coming alive. Trash cans rattled in the morning breeze, streetlights flickered off one by one, and the faint smell of fresh coffee mingled with wet concrete. Harris and the dog walked through familiar streets that now felt almost sacred, each corner, each alley imbued with the memory of past missions, of danger navigated, of lives saved. The dog moved with confidence now, muscles relaxed, ears up, tail high, a far cry from the trembling, anxious figure of days past. Children waved from windows, passers-by glanced with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, and somewhere, in the collective hum of the waking city, the unspoken acknowledgement of heroism seemed to ripple outward, subtle but undeniable. Harris led the dog to the park near the river, the same place where hours earlier they had walked in fog and dread. Now sunlight dappled through trees, casting long, golden streaks on the grass, highlighting the dog's glossy coat. He ran ahead, chasing shadows, sniffing the earth with a joy that had been absent for days, a pure, untainted happiness born from safety and recognition. Harris watched, feeling a swell of emotion so intense it pressed at the edges of his chest, threatening to spill in tears. The dog's courage had been proven, his loyalty had been vindicated, and yet the quiet moments, the simple joy of being alive, of being together, felt more powerful than any report, any medal, any bureaucratic acknowledgement ever could. Harris remembered the night of the mission, the whispers, the paper orders, the looming threat of finality. He had carried rage, guilt, fear, but also an unshakable belief in the dog's heart. That belief had sustained both of them through darkness, through storms, through moments where hope seemed impossible. Now, sitting on a sunlit bench, the dog's head resting on his knee, Harris allowed himself to breathe fully, to feel the depth of relief, pride, and love that had carried them through the storm. The dog looked up, golden eyes catching the morning light, and Harris understood. This was the reward, not applause or accolades, but trust restored, courage recognized, a life affirmed. In the days that followed, the bond between Harris and the dog deepened in ways quiet and profound. Training resumed, but now with a new rhythm, a sense of partnership rather than mere duty. Walks through the city became rituals, each step a celebration of survival, each glance a shared understanding that transcended words. Harris noticed small changes in the dog, the way he wagged his tail at distant sirens without fear, the calm confidence with which he navigated crowded streets, the subtle nudge of a nose against a hand in reassurance. These gestures, delicate and almost imperceptible, spoke louder than any official report ever could. They were proof that loyalty, once misunderstood, could flourish again when nurtured with patience, care, and unwavering belief. The department eventually acknowledged the dog's heroism officially, correcting reports, awarding commendations, and hosting a quiet ceremony that brought tears to Harris's eyes. Yet the true victory had always been private. The soft moments in early morning sun, the shared warmth on a cold bench, the quiet understanding in a glance, the unspoken promise that no storm, no failure, no bureaucratic decree could sever the bond forged in loyalty and courage. Harris often found himself watching the dog as he rested, noting the rise and fall of his chest, the flick of an ear, the occasional playful bark at a passing butterfly. Every movement was a reminder that life, when valued and defended, could heal, could redeem, and could flourish. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the river, casting amber and rose across the horizon, Harris and the dog sat together at the water's edge. The world around them softened, the hum of the city quieted, the wind brushed the surface of the river, and the first stars blinked faintly in the coming night. Harris stroked the dog's head, feeling the warmth, the steady heartbeat, the quiet trust. "You're home," he whispered, the words carrying weight beyond measure. "And we're both home." The dog leaned into him, eyes closing in a rare, deep relaxation, and Harris felt the final gentle swell of emotion, the knowledge that battle had ended, honor restored, and life reclaimed. As darkness settled fully, Harris stood leash in hand and watched the dog explore the final rays of sunlight, muscles relaxed, tail high, confident in the world again. The precinct, the missions, the storms, they had passed. What remained was quiet, unshakable, eternal, a bond forged in trust, strengthened by courage, and sealed in the unspoken language of loyalty. Harris knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever shadows might return, the dog would not falter, and neither would he. Together they had endured, they had survived, they had been proven. The last light of the day caught on the dog's glossy coat, highlighting the strength, the intelligence, the heroism that had always been there. Harris felt a soft smile tug at his lips, a rare full release of tension and relief. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to the dog's, inhaling the familiar scent of fur and earth, rain and resilience, and whispered into the twilight, "We made it, and made it, and now we can finally be free." The dog nudged his hand gently, a small, perfect affirmation, and in that moment the world felt balanced again. The mission, the storm, the fear, they were behind them. Ahead lay sunlit streets, quiet benches, and countless days of trust, companionship, and unwavering courage. And in the golden glow of evening, Harris realized that some bonds, once forged, could never be broken.